What is a visa sponsor? Why is it one of the most important things if you are looking to get a job here in the UK from an international background, physio student, healthcare student, or healthcare professional working abroad trying to come into the UK? If you've identified you need a visa to carry on working or to get a job in healthcare here in England, the visa sponsorship is the most important thing during the early stages of your whole application process. But what exactly is it? What does it mean? Who is a sponsor? How do you figure out who's a sponsor? And how do you navigate the whole process and minefield? In this video, I'm going to be explaining, what a visa sponsor is. I'm going to be trying to answer a few of the questions that are more basic about sponsorship and things you probably should know before you carry on through the application process. And a lot of these tips will actually try and avoid wasting your time, meaning they're going to try to save you time and not make some of the mistakes that I made in the past and a lot of people will be making, okay? My name is Farouk Bello. I'm the host of the Ruxel podcast, and I'm making videos about the whole process of immigration, visa applications, and getting a job here in the UK if you're from an international background, particularly if you're an international student working already studying here in the UK and you want to get a job to progress your career, or you are coming from an international background, different countries all around, and you've identified you need a visa to work in the UK. These videos are going to be very helpful to try and avoid some of the easy mistakes and very common mistakes a lot of people make. I've made some of them quite myself. And towards the latter half of the video, at the end, I will be explaining some of the things that happened to me that I think you probably can benefit from. But let's get straight into explaining what is a visa sponsor. A visa sponsor would also be known as, an approved employer. Now you find that on some of the documents. You might find approved employer, you might find visa sponsor. They're more or less the same thing. A visa sponsor, for example, is an employer who is willing to provide you with a certificate of sponsorship. I'll talk a little bit about the certificate of sponsorship in a second, but basically every employer is not a sponsor. This is a very important thing that a lot of people don't actually understand, is that not every job that is vacant sponsors visas. However, every sponsor, everyone who can sponsor your visa is going to be your employer, particularly if you're trying to get a job in the NHS or coming from abroad or in the UK. Mostly big companies, big hospitals, big trusts do sponsor visas. However, not every one of them do. So this is very important. So you avoid wasting your time when you are trying to, send out job applications to multiple companies and you're not even sure if they actually sponsor visas. It will be a waste of your time to an extent. The only thing you really be gaining is maybe some experience as to what to expect. However, most of the times it will end up in a favorable and unfavorable position for you. But there are a few caveats which I will explain in a second, okay? Now, I talked a bit about certificate of sponsorship. Now, a certificate of sponsorship is basically what you will get from your sponsor, which is your employer. After you have passed, obviously, you've made the application, you've gotten the job, and they've said, we're going to sponsor your visa. They're going to provide you with a certificate of sponsorship, which is basically evidence to the UK government and the Home Office to say that you've actually gotten the job within this employer. And basically your certificate of sponsorship will outline quite a few different things. It will outline what is your salary, what is your job role, what is your job description, where are you going to be working, what is your base of operations. And it's basically providing the Home Office to say that you have actually come here to work and you're not just going to be, faffing around and, having a nice time, that employer is actually now responsible for you. Which is why some companies are not always, willing to sponsor visas, because it's basically they're putting their line as well, themselves on the line, saying that we've recruited you and you're going to be doing the job you say you're going to be doing. And this is also evidence for the Home Office so that they can be aware of what you're actually doing here in the country. Now, just so you know, before we go on, certificate of sponsorship is only one piece of the pie for the application process, but we'll talk about all those other ones later down the line. But it's a very important one, and without it, you don't really have an application without a true sponsorship certificate, and you have to go through the other stages before you actually get a certificate of sponsorship. The application X, Y, and Z. But it's always good to know it ahead of time. The biggest thing you want to avoid when you are going through the whole process of visa sponsorship is time wasting. Now, a lot of the times, if you don't know about sponsorship and you don't know it early enough during your application process, and a lot of people it's not immediately directly aware or straightforward in your face when you're knowing about the sponsorship process. So what a lot of times will happen is you make up applications multiple places, you do the job interview, and then you get to the point where they say we don't offer you a visa, and then you start scrambling to figure out what does a sponsor mean, what is it all about. Now, that is big time wasting. Now, let's move into the next segment, which will actually help cut down this time wasting, which is how to actually know what companies sponsor visas, what employers will give you a, in theory, a certificate of sponsorship. How do you know which company sponsors visas? Now, this process is actually quite straightforward. Look at the visa sponsorship list. Now, this list is a very long list of, I think, over 30,000 companies in the UK at the moment that sponsor visas. Now, these are companies that, in theory, they will be able to provide you with a certificate of sponsorship because they have gone through what is called the sponsorship license. They have a sponsorship license, meaning they can sponsor your visa. However, there's certain caveats with that as well, but we'll leave that towards the end of the video. Basically, these are the companies you really want to be focusing your applications on. Now, there are multiple ways you can, try and figure it out. One thing I do not recommend is trying to go through every single company on this list, particularly in health, because a lot of these companies will not be particularly relevant to you if you're going to health. It's like trying to, you want to apply for a physiotherapy job and you're looking at lists of tech companies. Those two don't really necessarily relate. And even though all these companies can sponsor your visa, doesn't mean they always will want to sponsor your visa for multiple reasons. One, they may not have job vacancies. So you going down that list and trying to apply for each of those ones, they may not have the job vacancies. They may not have enough sponsorship certificates to issue. Now that's a whole topic in itself, but that's a trickier one where even if they are on that list, they might not sponsor. So what I strongly would recommend if you are trying to use this list to figure out which companies you want to apply for is actually do the regular thing, which is, go on the job websites where you find jobs, NHS jobs, and other, where you find job, LinkedIn. Find the company, you will see the company name, and then you cross-check it with the sponsorship list. Now, there's a little bit of a trick where you can actually just, search for the company's name to see which actually companies, if they actually cross-reference, basically knowing that this is the company you want to apply for and they're actually on the list. That gives you a good idea. It basically increases your chances of not getting rejected if you are actually successful towards the end of it. Because if they're not on that list, what you're going to then be asking for the company to do is, at this point, some companies are more, willing to do this. They'll actually apply for their visa sponsorship license. However, it can take up to 8 weeks and requires a lot of paperwork on their side. So not every company is very willing, especially when they can probably get a home student or a home individual, someone who's actually British, to do the job. So it's a bit tricky on that side. So I always recommend, go through the sponsorship list. If they're already there, it makes it a lot easier, meaning they should already know the process of how to do, issue a certificate of sponsorship, which will help you a lot. Now, just before I move on to talking about, personal experience, I'll make sure to just be aware that, as I said, that most companies that are on the sponsorship list will sponsor your visa, and they can. It doesn't always mean they will. Now, this comes back to something that happened to me where I've had multiple interviews. I think during my whole application process, I probably had about over 10 interviews, 10 applications. I sent them out. Some of these companies, this was even earlier before I knew. I was applying to some, I would get through the whole process, and then they would tell me that they don't sponsor visas at all. So basically the whole application process, that's gone for that job. However, there are certain scenarios where even a company on the sponsorship list, and they have the sponsorship list and they have the HR department who can support your application, all they will do is sponsor you, provide you with the certificate of sponsorship, and then you have to figure out every other thing by yourself. Some employers have the whole legal team which they will support you throughout, some do not. So that's always the trickier part where you have to gauge, because you might have to do it yourself even though they've given you that certificate of sponsorship. Now, why is it so important you are aware of this before you start your application? It's back to, again, time wasting and maximizing your opportunities. Now, let me give you a personal story from my side where I had cross-referenced the employer I was applying to. I did the application. I knew they sponsored visas. However, it got to the point where after I was successful with the application, I was, smack dab. The person who is actually interviewing you may not be fully aware of the whole sponsorship thing because it's not something that they come across every day, particularly in certain sectors. For example, physiotherapy, you don't find too many international healthcare workers, in particularly physiotherapists, working in the UK. You find some, but some companies, some employers, NHS Trust, are not very aware. So they then had to go to the HR department, ask about it, and then they came back to me. And if you're surprised, what they said was they don't have enough certificates to issue to physiotherapists. This is actually what they said. They said if you're a doctor, they probably could have, but but because I'm physiotherapist, they did not. So, and then they put me on a list that I never heard from them again. That I already knew I was not going to hear from them. Once they tell you something like that, it basically means that one of two things: either the HR department at that time doesn't want to go through the whole process of, giving you a whole certificate, because it takes quite a while and it's never an instant thing. If you're a home student, you apply for a job, you might be able to start within a month or two. But they know that, if you're international, coming from an international background, it's very unlikely you're going to be starting in a month as soon as you get it immediately, because of the multiple steps you would have to take. So it's not everyone who wants to sponsor just decides to hand out, visa sponsorships here and there. Some of them are very, very cautious with how they handle it and who they give it to, because some companies actually have X amount. They may have only 10 for a department or 10 for a whole trust, for example, and they say we can only really hire 10 international people, because it's also a bit of liability on their side when they're having to vouch for you and basically say you are here to work with us. I hope that made the whole visa process a bit simpler. Talking about sponsorship, it's not a huge topic, this part of sponsorship, and how to actually use the sponsorship list, but I will be making another video talking about who are the best people to sponsor your visa. Who should you be focusing your attention on? Which companies is it? Which trust? Which area of the trust should you be focusing your attention to give you the best chance of actually procuring a visa sponsorship? Because I've had cases where I've gone down to Wales, 5-hour drives, and it's unsuccessful. You don't want to waste your time. So make sure to subscribe, and if you have any questions, leave a comment, or check out my socials, and I'm more than happy to answer anyone. Now, obviously, this is a snapshot of the whole sponsorship process. However, I will do shorter videos on each of the specific components so that you can actually have, more of an understanding of why you need it and how to actually get it. Something such as how to actually get is a very big one, or that sponsorship certificate, what does it actually look like, and what do you actually need to, what does it need to show, basically? Because sometimes, some companies will do funny things where I've heard cases of where the certificate of sponsorship was not actually detailed enough with what the home office was looking for, and basically you have to take it back and start the whole process again. So I'll do a breakdown on some of these topics. But my name is Farouk, and until the next video.